This unknown boy grew up questioning whether this woman was truly his mother or the person who had taken him. She was certain he was her son, Bobby, who had vanished months earlier without a trace. But if we place the photos of Bobby beside the unknown boy, what do we really see? At first, they appear to be the same child, but are they? Look more carefully at the shape of the face, the mouth, the nose, and most importantly, the eyes. What sounds like a simple question became a mystery that troubled people for generations, until the truth was finally uncovered nearly 100 years later. The case became even more confusing when two different mothers insisted the unidentified boy belonged to them. Julia Anderson claimed he was her son, Bruce, while Lessie Dunbar believed he was Bobby, the child she had lost. But both claims could not be true, could they? Type "still here" if you're following this dark turn. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to a Friday in August, to a wooded lake in southern Louisiana, and to the last ordinary hours of a small boy's recorded life. On August 23, 1912, the Dunbar family was staying at their cabin on Swayze Lake in Louisiana. The lake sat in a heavily wooded area that functioned more like a swamp than a recreational body of water. The party that weekend included 11 people: Bobby's parents, Lessie and Percy Dunbar, Bobby's younger brother Alonzo, along with several family friends. Bobby himself was 4 years old. That morning, Percy Dunbar had to leave for work. Bobby, upset at his father's departure, threw a small tantrum and, in the process, broke the strap of his straw hat. Lessie busied herself preparing for a fish fry. A family friend named Paul Mizzy, who often took Bobby horseback riding and affectionately called him Heavy, offered to take the boy down to the lake to shoot garfish. Bobby's mother agreed, and several other boys from the group decided to join them. Later that morning, the group was called back to camp for lunch. They made their way back together, and it was during this return that the last confirmed exchange with Bobby occurred. Paul Mizzy, carrying Bobby's brother Alonzo on his shoulders, joked with Bobby that he should get out of the way or he would be run over. Bobby reportedly laughed and retorted that Paul was not big enough to do it. It was the kind of small, spirited remark that gets remembered only in retrospect. When the group arrived back at camp, Lessie looked around and realized that Bobby was not with them. He was simply gone. The search that began that evening was immediate and extensive. Searchers blasted the lake with dynamite and stretched a long cable fitted with large hooks across the water to drag the depths for a body. Divers went into the lake the following morning to search coves and areas where a body could become trapped in the weeds. The only remains recovered were those of a deer. No trace of Bobby was found. By Saturday, August 24th, approximately 500 men had joined the search. Searchers tested a straw hat with a broken strap similar to the one Bobby had been wearing to see how long it could remain afloat. The hat floated for hours without assistance. The absence of even that small piece of evidence deepened the unease. Bobby's footprints had been found near the area, and they appeared to stop at the railway tracks. After that, there was nothing. The lack of a body led to competing theories about what had happened. One possibility was that he had wandered into the water and drowned. Searchers took that possibility seriously enough to cut open alligators found in the area, hoping to find remains inside. None were found. The other possibility was that someone had taken him. Strangers had reportedly been seen near Swayze Lake and along the nearby railway tracks in the days around the disappearance. The stopping point of Bobby's footprints at the tracks seemed to align with that theory. The Dunbar family and many in the community began to believe that Bobby had not drowned at all, but had been carried away by an unknown person. Bobby was described as having darkening blonde hair, blue eyes, a mole on his neck, and a burn scar on his big toe. He had been wearing a straw hat, blue rompers, and no shoes. The case spread quickly. Authorities contacted police in New Orleans, roughly 130 miles away. Percy Dunbar traveled to the city himself and distributed 700 copies of his son's photograph. A detective agency printed postcards with Bobby's picture and description and mailed them to officials across a wide stretch of the southern United States, from East Texas to Florida. The entire town of Opelousas, where the Dunbars lived, pooled together a reward of $1,000 for the return of the boy, alive, with no questions asked. In 1912, that sum was roughly equivalent to $22,000 today. More than 8 months passed. No credible leads emerged. The reward money was returned to the townspeople who had donated it. Then, just 1 week after that return, a wire arrived from a small town in Mississippi. In April of 1913, a message came from the town of Hub in southern Mississippi. A group called the Ladies of Hub had noticed an older traveling handyman named William Cantwell Walters who had been passing through the area with a young boy. The boy's appearance reminded local residents of the description of the missing Bobby Dunbar. His foot had been too dirty for anyone to get a clear look, but the resemblance was enough to prompt a report. Authorities caught up with Walters and questioned him. He told them that the boy was not Bobby Dunbar. He said the child's name was Charles Bruce Anderson, the illegitimate son of his brother and a woman named Julia Anderson, who had worked for his family. According to Walters, Julia Anderson had left the boy temporarily in his care while she went to look for work, and he had been traveling with the child ever since. Several local residents supported his account. Authorities arrested him anyway and placed the boy in custody. The Dunbars received photographs of the boy and were uncertain. They traveled to Mississippi to see him in person. That night, by lamplight, Lessie Dunbar examined the child closely. She looked at his face and then checked his big toe for the burn scar she knew her son had. The toe appeared smooth. She said, and this is a direct quote reported by newspapers at the time, that she did not know and was not quite sure. The boy showed no sign of recognizing her. He resisted her attempts to hold him. She noted that his eyes did not seem large enough. The identification was inconclusive that first night. She was given a second opportunity the following day. During that time, she bathed the boy and examined him more carefully. The child had a scar on his left foot and a mole on his neck, in positions consistent with what she remembered of Bobby. After that examination, Lessie declared that she had found her son. She reportedly shouted her gratitude and then fainted from the weight of the moment. The initial reunion, however, remained disputed even at the time. One newspaper described it as immediately joyful, claiming the boy shouted the word "Mother" upon seeing Lessie. Other accounts described both parents as hesitant. Some reports noted that the boy did not recognize his father, his mother, or his brother Alonzo. The Dunbars were allowed to take the child home. A few days after the boy arrived in Opelousas, Julia Anderson appeared. She had traveled to Mississippi and then to Louisiana to make her own claim on the child. She told reporters that in February of 1912, she had allowed Walters to take her son Bruce for a brief visit to his sister's home. That visit was supposed to last only a few days. It had now been over a year. She stated plainly that she had not given her son to Walters permanently, and that she had not seen Bruce since the day he left with him. A newspaper in New Orleans arranged for Anderson to travel to Opelousas to make a formal identification. She arrived on May 1st, 1913. But from the moment she set foot in the Dunbars' hometown, the situation was already tilted against her. The community had celebrated the boy's return as a kind of miracle. He had been paraded through town on a flower-covered fire engine. The residents of Opelousas had already decided who this child was. The boy was brought before Anderson along with 4 other boys of roughly the same age. She did not immediately identify him. None of the boys appeared to recognize her either. Her hesitation, which mirrored Lessie Dunbar's initial uncertainty from weeks earlier, was treated very differently by observers and by the press. The coverage of Julia Anderson in the newspapers was severe. She was described in explicitly degrading terms. One article noted that she had 3 children by 2 different men and implied that she was a woman of poor moral character. Other coverage called her illiterate and naive. Reporters also pointed out that within a short span of time she had lost all of her children. One daughter had been placed for adoption, a baby had died unexpectedly, and she had been blamed for that death without justification. Then Bruce had gone with Walters and not returned. An article in the New Orleans Item described her as a woman who had simply forgotten her own child. Anderson returned the next day and stated clearly that she was certain the boy was her son Bruce. But the news of her initial uncertainty had already spread. The town had already accepted the narrative. She had no legal representation, no financial resources, and no allies in a community that viewed her as an obstacle to a story they had already decided was over. A court-appointed arbiter ruled in favor of the Dunbars. The boy would remain with them. Anderson left Opelousas without her son, and the matter was treated as settled. William Walters, convicted of kidnapping, served 2 years in prison. His attorney successfully appealed the conviction, but the cost of the first trial led the court to decline a retrial. He was released. He spent the rest of his life maintaining that he had done nothing wrong and that the boy was Bruce Anderson. He died in 1930 from blood poisoning, having never received a response to a letter he had written to the boy asking how he was getting on in life. The child, who was now Bobby Dunbar, adjusted to his life in Opelousas. He played with his brothers and appeared to settle into the household. He was raised as the Dunbar's son. At 18, he fell in love with a woman named Marjorie from a nearby town. They married in 1935 and had 4 children together. He lived his life in Louisiana and died in 1966. Throughout his life, family members said, he was told about what had happened during his early childhood. He acknowledged the story, but he maintained firmly that he knew who he was. He believed he was Bobby Dunbar. There is no evidence that he ever doubted it, at least not in any way he expressed to the people around him. But his granddaughter would eventually be the one to ask the question that no one in the family had been willing to press all the way to its end. In 1999, Margaret Dunbar Cutright began a serious investigation into her family's history. She had grown up hearing the story of her grandfather's kidnapping from her grandmother and had shared it with her own children in turn. Her father gave her a scrapbook containing more than 400 newspaper articles about the case. She described the scrapbook as a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box, and she spent months trying to piece it together. The deeper she read, the more she noticed inconsistencies. Different newspapers reported the events of the reunion in contradictory ways. One account said Lessie immediately recognized Bobby. Another included Lessie's own words expressing doubt. Some papers reported that Percy Dunbar had originally told reporters that the boy did not look like his son and that his eyes were too small. The documented record was not the clean, confirmed reunion that family memory had preserved. Cutright pursued her research obsessively across small-town libraries, archives, and courthouses throughout the southern United States. Eventually, the possibility of a DNA comparison came up. Her father, Bob Dunbar Jr., the son of the man who had lived as Bobby Dunbar, agreed to provide a sample. That sample would be compared against DNA from a cousin on his mother's side, specifically a son of Bobby's brother, Alonzo, who would have shared the original Dunbar bloodline. Not everyone in the family supported the decision. One of Cutright's uncles expressed the concern plainly. No matter how the test turned out, he said, there would be a sense of loss. He questioned what was truly to be gained. In 2004, the DNA test was completed. The result was conclusive. Bob Dunbar Jr. was not biologically related to the Dunbar family. The boy the Dunbars had claimed from Mississippi in 1913, the boy who had grown up in Opelousas, married, raised a family, and died in 1966 believing he was Bobby Dunbar, was not Bobby Dunbar. He was Bruce Anderson, the son of Julia Anderson. The Anderson family received the news as a vindication of a claim their family had made for nearly a century. The family of William Cantwell Walters received it as exoneration of a man who had died in 1930, still insisting he had done nothing wrong. What the DNA test could not answer was the question that had been at the center of this story from the very beginning. Where was the real Bobby Dunbar? Margaret Dunbar Cutright, after years of research, concluded that the most likely explanation was that Bobby had drowned in Swayze Lake in the summer of 1912, and that the lake or the swamp simply never gave him back. The extensive searches had failed to recover a body, but the absence of evidence in a dense swamp environment was not evidence of absence. Some journalists and researchers who examined the case over the years raised a more difficult possibility. They noted the intensity with which the Dunbar parents had pushed to claim the boy despite early uncertainty, and they raised the question of whether something had gone wrong on that August day, something that Percy and Lessie Dunbar themselves were responsible for, and whether the adoption of Bruce Anderson had served, consciously or not, to close a chapter that might otherwise have demanded a different kind of accounting. That theory has never been supported with direct evidence, and it remains speculation. Others have noted the reports from the time of suspicious individuals seen near the lake and near the railway tracks where Bobby's footprints stopped. The idea that a stranger had taken him was never definitively eliminated. It was simply never confirmed either. None of these threads lead anywhere certain. The real Bobby Dunbar, the actual 4-year-old child who broke the strap of his hat and talked back to Paul Mizzy on that Friday morning, left no verified trace after the railway tracks. What remains of this case is the outline of a life that was lived under a borrowed name. Bruce Anderson spent his childhood in a home that was not his, given to a family that needed him to be someone he was not. He grew up, built a life, and died without the knowledge that the name he carried and the history he claimed were not his own. Whether he suffered from that displacement in ways that were visible or invisible to those around him, we cannot say. What the record shows is that he lived with consistency and apparent conviction inside the identity that had been assigned to him. Julia Anderson, the woman who had lost him, spent years trying to reclaim a son that the law, the press, and an entire community had decided was someone else's. She had the least power of anyone involved in this case, and she bore the greatest portion of the cost. The courts dismissed her, the newspapers humiliated her, and the town of Opelousas made sure she left without what she had come for. She was right, and it took nearly 90 years for the evidence to say so formally. William Walters died in a ditch between the crime he was convicted of and the exoneration he never received. He wrote a letter to a boy he believed was Bruce, asking how he had grown up, and he died before reading any reply. And somewhere at the bottom of a Louisiana swamp, or somewhere along a railway line in the summer of 1912, or perhaps in some direction no searcher ever thought to look, the real Bobby Dunbar simply ceased to be traceable. No bones recovered, no confirmed end, just the broken strap of a straw hat and the last recorded sound of a small boy's voice, talking back to a man who said he could not be stopped. The case was declared solved by DNA in 2004, but solved is perhaps not quite the right word. The identity of the boy the Dunbars raised was confirmed. The claim of Julia Anderson was vindicated. The conviction of William Walters was rendered unjust by history, if not by any living court. But the original question, the one that started all of this, what happened to Bobby Dunbar? Where he went and whether he suffered or simply disappeared quickly into the water on a summer morning, that question has no answer. It remains open. It has remained open for more than 100 years. It is likely to remain open forever. And that is perhaps the most unsettling truth of the entire case. Not that a boy was raised under a false name, not that a mother was dismissed by courts and scorned by newspapers, not even that a man was convicted of a crime that DNA would eventually show he had not committed. The most unsettling truth is that the child at the center of it all, the real Bobby Dunbar, the one whose disappearance set everything else in motion, was never found. He left the world without leaving a trace that anyone was ever able to recover. And the story that bears his name belongs, in the end, to someone else entirely. Others have thought about this case for a long time, and the questions it raises about memory, loss, and the things families tell themselves to keep going do not have simple answers. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone else who would sit with it the way you just did. The physical evidence may fade, but the stories behind these final traces endure. We look forward to reading your reflections and theories below. Thank you for your time and empathy today. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.